Thank you. So some very interesting presentations this morning. I want to open it to the floor. I'm sure a lot of interesting material presented this morning. Just to kick off, a question for Terry. A lot of the conversations you'll see in our own Irish context here, there's a missing piece, and that's the bit on policy. We don't have a policy position in Ireland here at the moment on BIM. I'm just wondering, from your own perspective and the work and the strides you've made, how important is it for the government to harness a position and align how people do BIM?
I think having an imperative set is always going to be really, really useful. And I think having that set in the UK by the Cabinet Office has really helped harness the BIM task group. And I think the BIM task group has then been able to form to set up the BIM level 2, or parameters really, the documentation. We've been able to work with departments, and that's because this needs to be led, I think, from the client as well as the industry. So it's that sort of push-pull thing. So I think you need that pull from the top, but then you need the push then to really land it by the industry. So I think having that catalyst really is quite important to get some form of cover, some form of mandation, or at least active sponsorship from the top.
Ralph, you have a question.
Thanks. This is also for Terry. I just wondered what stage you're at with the MOJ project. I mean, I think it's fantastic. You know, you're talking about 20% savings in the capital expenditure, and I think what was really interesting was the moving of 15% from process to actual bricks and mortar. So it's, you know, it's even more significant. But in terms of the operational costs, what do you anticipate? Or is there any discussion yet on what you anticipate in terms of savings in the operational stage?
In terms of the first trial project we've done, in fact 2 now, but with the Cook and Wood one I've shown, that's now been in operation for about 3 months. So it's, what I can say is that in that sort of 3 months, we haven't had a lot of the teething problems that we normally get with how do you turn the boiler on. Actually, I've got an issue, and I know you gave us all the teachings before we took the building over, but he's left, or you know, it was someone else that really wasn't to do with FM. We haven't had those issues. In terms of the have we achieved the operational life cycle? I think we're probably too early in that, but we are going to do a 6-month review, and then we'll do a year review, and then we're going to do a 2-year review. So I think that information will start to feed in. But when we get that information, we want to play that back into the standardisation. The problem that we have got, and we're trying to work through now with the commercials, is that, and it's one, gaining that working relationship with your supply chain, because they're concerned that we'll go back in 2 years and say, hang on a minute, you said that was going to save us 5% on our energy, and it saved us 3%, therefore that's not very good, is it? We are desperately trying to avoid that, because we want to work with the industry to improve what we do. So we're just sort of working through the commercials with them at the moment. But in terms of real operational figures to share with you, I can share with you the staffing numbers. So with an existing prison, the operational cost per prisoner place is about £21,000 on average. With the new designs that we've got, we think the prisoner place is about £13,000 a place. So that's in staffing, that's in, and then you start to put the energy cost over that. So we've got some evidence that our designs are right in terms of staffing levels, and it's just whether we can then play that through in the operational cost.
Presumably, if you hadn't done that project in BIM, there would have been a cost, at the end of the project to take all the, that mountain of paper that you normally get and put it into your operational systems. I mean, is that something that you've kind of measured or as an immediate saving?
It's something that we haven't measured, but we are aware of it. It took, as I said before, we just about get the right amount of information to run the building safely in compliance with our construction design management regulations. But we only just about get the right amount. And then 6-7 months of our design, my staff time and our consultants' time, chasing up the contractors, chasing up the subcontractors, and in the end, having to sort of go back to manufacturers ourselves to get information. That's hugely costly. But what we have found with the projects that we've run at the moment, with Cook and Wood, with a new kitchen and sort of other building extensions that we've done at HMP Winchester, we're getting that information, full information, on day one, on day one of operation. And what we're able to do is if you get that information that's being built up in the COBie files, the extraction tools, when we started with Cookham, I'd be lying if I said that the COBie extraction information tools were sort of there, and they weren't, and it took us quite a long time to get in. We got some of the information automatically, but we had to go in manually to get some of it out, and it did take a bit of time. We've seen over the past 8 months, 6 months, that the industry's picking up at such a rate that those COBie extraction tools to get information out are becoming better and better and better all the time. And we're now able to start to run checking regimes at each of those stages. So we can check that is the information there for the boilers, and as the plant starts to be put into the drawing, is that information there? So we're able to have that conversation much earlier on, because they're failing their checks to go from one stage to another, because we can check it using the COBie data, which is embedded in the models. So we will get a lot better.
Come to you in a sec. John?
I have a question here. We're lucky to have two people who perhaps are a bit further down the road than we are in Ireland at the moment. And in the interest of getting the best value from this, I have a 3-part question. One, what formed the basis of your baseline benchmarking? The second part of the question is whether in actual fact the savings, since there is obviously, besides government mandating the use of BIM in the UK, there obviously is an effort to try and encourage people as well to use it in the private sector. So is there a location where you are actually publishing the gains that you are making that would obviously be of interest to other developers? And finally, have you any knowledge of what benefit the supply chain are getting commercially from the use of BIM? Thank you.
Do you want to share that one, or do you kick us off on that, Terry?
Okay. I'll just run through very quickly where we are in terms of the basis of the benchmarks. As part of the construction strategy, central government departments were asked to benchmark their cost of certain projects. So new build, accommodation blocks, if it's accommodation blocks, or flood defences, or hospitals, or whatever it was, at 09-10 baselines. Okay, so and we had to lodge those with Cabinet Office, and they were verified by Cabinet Office auditors. So, as we are delivering our projects now, we're having to put quarterly returns back into Cabinet Office, which again are scrutinised by Cabinet Office auditors, and then that's published in the benchmarking report that's on the Cabinet Office website. So that's available. Is that just BIM? No, it's about everything that we're doing. So it's BIM, it's collaborative procurement, it's all those things. We've just started to develop now. I've got a very small team. It's one person that's trying to put together a tool that is trying to capture what BIM actually brings out. So the benefits of BIM. So we're only starting to sort of look at our data and trying to capture benefits in a more elemental way. In terms of the benefits of the supply chain, I think there is a benefit. On the slide, there was the contractors are starting to sort of think in terms of standardising their approach about sort of using the standard granules to break down to form better extraction quantities and cost quantities. And I think they feel that if they're allowed to work with their supply chains a bit more intelligently, if they're allowed to, if they build up that BIM model and go into sort of programming and costing information, I think they feel that they can drive out cost. In fact, it was the industry that signed up to the 2025 document, so that's 33% cheaper, 50% faster, because I think they realise that there is an inherent waste in the system, and I mean from client to delivery to operation. So I think they do see there's a benefit there. One thing that we do at the moment is try and share the benefits in a project as we move forward. So we're just tendering a very large prison in North Wales. It's just come back from tender. And we put that as a definite 2-stage where we ask them to give us some not to exceed prices on 1 or 2 of the buildings. We put provisional sums in for the rest of the buildings. The tenderer that we choose to work through will get a percentage of the saving working with us on the fixed price, and he'll get a slightly larger percentage on the figures that he manages to beat our provisional sums for the rest of the buildings. So we're sort of sharing our savings, and I think that's the only way we can do it really, rather than try and take them all ourselves. Thank you.
And in the same way as Terry, obviously we have our baselines. At the moment we have baselines for walls and embankments, because as we described earlier, it's quite challenging having baselines for our whole project. Obviously we do have those sort of project costs. I think one thing I'd like to point out is, particularly in the early days of BIM, there are some suppliers out there that have got it and they've implemented it as a business efficiency. So I think, for instance, Balfour Beatty particularly, they were leading the way even before I think it came our way, because they realised it brought them efficiency. They could deliver quicker, faster for less, because it does eliminate the wasted activities that they undertake. So if you can eliminate those, you've got a more efficient business model. You're creating profit. So I think what I would say is the people that are there are people out in the market that have demonstrated it works for them as a business model.
So there are actually industry leaders.
Yes. Yeah.
Question,
Thanks. 3 excellent presentations. It's Paul Ebbs from the Construction Innovation Lab. Just a question for Terry and Karen regarding innovation and continuous improvement, which I suppose is one of the main tenets of Lean. But also with Lean, sharing information and sharing innovations is very important. Your experience just with contractors in the UK, are they sharing their innovations further downstream? And also, is the whole process being improved by sharing information on innovations downstream? Thanks.
Good question. I think we've operated in 2 ways within the MOJ. When we first started our partnering frameworks, we sort of pre-qualified the supply chain on our frameworks, and then we used to award work based on sort of a number of factors, but effectively they didn't need to tender. They became part of our sort of awarded projects. I would say that when we were doing that, the innovation shared between the contractors was quite high. I think then we went to because the procurement regs changed, and we had to go through a mini tendering process. And as soon as we went into the mini tendering process, the level of sharing between the contractors did stop. I think we're sort of working through that now, because, but it's in a slightly different way. I guess there's a sort of slight lax to it. So we will provide our standardised library that's open to anybody, and then we will work with a contractor, and then if they come up with some innovation on that project, then they keep it for that project. But actually, the IPI then sort of sits back with us, and we can put it in our library so other people can use moving forward. So we do have that arrangement with them. So we can share it, but the contractor does get the benefit out of it. I was with London Underground the other day, and their tendering process now, there's a big bank metro station development, and they've been working with their supply chains, and in their tender, they said, if you're not successful, we can buy the innovation off you and we can use it in with other contractors. And so they had a confidentiality agreement built in as they were going through the tender period. But for the tenderers that weren't successful, LUL actually bought the innovation off them, so they were paid for their effort, but they could use it on the project going forward and share it across contractors. So I think there is starting to be a better way of sharing information, but it's not as, all in a room and you give me your idea and I'll give you mine. I think it's during the project competition stage. I think there is sort of pockets of commercial activity which you'd expect, but in the wider sense, I think there will be a lot more sharing moving forward.
Just sorry, quickly.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I mean, with regards to our innovation, we talked about, Terry covered the efficiency savings. We have similar efficiency savings which account for about 15% over a 4-year period. Now, a lot of the savings that we have are delivered through innovation. So we are looking at how we can use different products and different construction methods, or particularly sort of eliminate activities within the construction process. What we are using is we have a magazine called Current, which if you tap into our website, you can have access to. And that's published about 3 times a year. We've been doing that for about the last 3 or 4 years to, well, not only because we had a problem with sort of on the flood side in that it's quite a niche market, very specialist. And we were really struggling a few years ago to attract any engineers, particularly new engineers. And it's a very, very small market. So we looked at how we could promote ourselves, really, for the benefit of being able to attract more people into the industry, but also make it more exciting. Because actually, as I described earlier, the structural side is relatively straightforward. Where you build is really quite interesting, and you do have the ability really to know that you're going home and actually you're saving lives, which is something which is quite unique. So we use the magazine to encourage innovation. So we showcase new pieces, new ways of designing things, new techniques, to encourage that sharing and that learning. Equally, when people discover something new and we make money, we make savings, then that works well for us, because obviously we can report against that. So.
Stephen?
Thank you. Stephen Burgess with the NDFA. Perhaps to Terry and Karen, but maybe Jared might have an observation on it as well. We're obviously from a client perspective, we're at the bottom of the curve coming up with the implementation of BIM. And you've both described the client side going out to engage with the supply chain again and to rebuild that experience and knowledge and awareness within the supply chain. I would just be interested, say, from Terry's perspective, having gone through the Cook and Wood project, how different the client involvement was in that project, And do you think that will be different because it was a Pathfinder project, or is this going to be the way the client engages in the future? And perhaps for Karen as well, in terms of the client's involvement, because we're talking about a collaborative process here, and a lot of prior discussion in forums that we've had have been about the collaboration with the design team, with the contractor, with the FM provider. But the client is in the middle of this. He is the promoter. I'd just be interested to see, has it changed your relationship, and do you think that that's an ongoing change in the relationship? And perhaps also maybe from the OPW's perspective, moving to this BIM-centred, is the client or the client representative role going to change, do you think?
Okay, thank you for that. One of the big deliverables from the construction strategy was for the intelligent client. And so I think very early on, there was an understanding that if the client wasn't acting intelligently and they weren't allowing the contractor to operate intelligently, then we weren't really going to get anywhere. So we had to relook at the way that we were procuring our works. So, or one of the other things that we were doing, in the MOJ is that we started lean project delivery back in January 2009. So that started to engage us with the contractor in much more detail throughout the project. We've run sort of training for our supply chain, understanding what lean means in construction, how to do root cause analysis, and we're working towards some form of accreditation for our supply chain in attaining sort of lean levels of maturity. So we were quite involved with them. Cook and Wood with BIM was a sort of an extension of that, and I think we started building up the model ourselves. Then we brought the contractor on board. I think more and more we'll bring the contractor on board and we'll just work as one team. So I think the client will become much more integral with the delivery team, and we have one delivery team that's building up the solution and then delivering that solution on site. I think that's the best way to do it. There is a form of procurement that is being trialled by the Ministry of Defence, and I know that EA are sort of looking at it, called Integrated Project Insurance, where literally you're picking a team to work with you and build up the options, and then from the options develop the output specification and the drawings and the models, and then deliver it. And that's one team that are acting as one team, and the IPI insurance actually covers the agreed maximum price of that job. So if it goes over that, it's covered by an insurance policy. Now what that does is change the way that it changes the team dynamics. So no longer are they all looking at their individual insurance liabilities, because if something goes wrong, they're actually tasked to work together to resolve it, rather than suddenly become sort of fractious in their engagement. So I think there's lots happening, but watch this space. I think, but certainly for us, the client is becoming much more central to the project delivery.
I would probably just add to that the EIR, the Employer's Information Requirements, because that's a very key document. So I know my BIM task group lead says if a supplier comes along to you and says, I can deliver BIM for you, they can't, because they can only deliver BIM for you when you've determined what it is you want and how you want it and when. So I think that is really demonstrating that it is client driven. So the client is determining how they want to operate. I think also with regards to sort of the end user, this is where government soft landings really click in, because we know internally new assets were delivered by a project team, and that was handed over. So the project team sat outside of the people that were actually managing the assets. And although we tried to adopt prints and have senior users, sometimes we know we've got competent project managers, we know we've got engineers managing that. I've handed over something that actually, we don't really like this. haven't thought about health and safety, you haven't, and so, that was an inherent problem, which obviously government soft landings is something that's trying to overcome. And for us, because we do own a lot of the assets that we operate anyway, we are sort of seeing that as two things. So getting that end user, getting the people that are going to be using those assets, and we're using, some of on our Woodford project, the operatives, the people that are going to go out and be cleaning the trash screens, etc., so we get their involvement right up front, and I think that's really key.
Well, with respect to where the client fits in with us, it's nowhere near as advanced as either of the two speakers. The facilities management end of things tends to be less emphasis on it than on the design end of things, that we more engage with the client at the design stage. The whole idea of the collaboration of getting the contractor on board early really is hampered or hindered or even ruled out by the form of government contracts we have, which is very adversarial. It's us versus the contractor rather than him being part of the team. But the one place I'm seeing at the moment where the client is very central and where the BIM is setting in is when we're not using the public works contract, is when we're using a PPP approach with the NDFA, where the clients, it's not quite the employer's requirements, but it's the room data sheets, which are very specific as to what's happening in every room. They are very BIM friendly with a good match with BIM and very easily populated from a BIM model. But that's about as close as we get to it at the moment, I'm afraid.
Okay, we've just time for another couple of questions. We'll take this one, and I think there's another one over there, and I think we'll close that.
Noel Kennedy, Intel. The EIR references there were very good, but Terry, at the very beginning of your presentation, you mentioned you're quite prescriptive. Is it beyond the EIR? Do you require additional, or is it embedded in the EIR documentation?
I think we've got two systems. We've got our lean system of project delivery, where we are quite prescriptive on how we want the contract put together or the programme. Because our experience is that there's about 3 or 4 programmes running on a project. One is for the client, excuse me. One is for the contractor senior management. There's one that the project manager will share with his contracts manager, and there's one that he'll have in his drawer that he's using. And quite often they never use any of them and say, well, I know how we're going to build this. We start with a ground scrub, then we put the foundations, then we... So we're really, really prescriptive in saying, look, this is the way we want the programme put together. This is the way we want you to do it. And we use that programme to upload all the data on our project database system. So the programme's uploaded, the data's collected and put into the database that we run our projects from. And it runs a quality check, so it gives them a report that says, actually, you're not doing this, or you're running things in parallel that shouldn't be run in parallel. So that's where we're really prescriptive. On our EIRs, we are quite prescriptive on what we want, but as Karen said, it really gets you to think about what do we want, and why do we want it, and how are we going to use it? Because at Cookham, we probably did ask for a bit too much information, and then you get it, and you think, blimey, what are we going to do with all this? And you're paying for that. So if we can make it as succinct as possible, then it gives the contractors half a chance, and it gives us half a chance to sort of use it as well. But the more you use data, actually, you can find more and more uses for it. So I think the secret is really trying to keep it down to a minimum.
Thank you.
Final question, just...
Paul Sexton, Skag Limited. I have 2 very short questions, if I can be a bit cheeky. How important does the panel think that the British government insistence on open standards over a single proprietary file format? And secondly, in relation to the Ministry of Justice, it's more lean than BIM, and what percentage of the savings would you attribute to lean as opposed to BIM? Are they integral?
Okay, the first bit on the open standards, I think, yeah, we are push to go down open standards. It's very difficult for a government to say this is what we're going to use in an open market. So, I think it is quite important. In terms of the lean and the BIM, we are just starting to trying to disseminate what the savings are. It's really difficult because for me, sort of you get BIM and you get the intelligent client function and you get your early contractor involvement, but it only works if you start to gel them together. And for me, the lean bit is that gelled bit that brings it all together. Because if we're sharing information, and I'm really being honest with you in the, I can't finish that because it gives us half a chance to then work together and say, well, these are the reasons, let's try and put some interventions in place to address those reasons. And if the BIM model's sort of sitting there as a sort of collaborative sort of font, if you like, it is difficult. We've just starting to trial a model that is starting to get some information just relating to BIM. But is it accurate? I don't know.
So, are you saying that the BIM having a model actually just feeds the transparency that allows the lean processes to work?
Yeah, I think it sort of sits in the middle, and it really helps you do that, because as you saw with the meetings that we had at Cookham and are happening on the other projects now, everybody's working in their own environment with the structures model and the architectural model and the M&E model, and all of a sudden it comes together, and you've got this sort of life rendition on the wall, which then forms a conversation. If none of them want to talk to each other, if they all hate each other, it doesn't matter if you have this thing on the wall. It's not going to you're not going to drive the benefits out. So if you've got that collaborative environment, and if people are willing to share that information, put it on the wall and just say, do you know what, you're right, I put my ducting in the wrong place, it needs to be changed, rather than have that conversation with, I told you that my ducting was going there, now you move your door. I think it's, you need to get over the human element, I think.
Could I just sort of add a point about sort of the open standards? Up to this point, the Cabinet Office and BIS, the Business Innovation and Skills Department, have worked together. Now, the BIS team are looking at department, have really a greater focus on sort of the IT. I think their vision is that having open standards, creating an environment where data can be more easily entered into different systems means actually you're going to create innovation in the IT market. So, and create business for SMEs as well. So there may be specialist functions that, that you wouldn't want to necessarily have in a big IT system, but by being able to easily transfer that information, you can create business, although it may be a very, very small niche market. And I think that's the key element. It's, it quite probably will be that we may, as an interim, have to require particular types, because that's actually the only way we can manage it at this present moment in time. But we're not looking to clamp down the market and not make it a free and open commercial environment.
I think in your presentation you said it very well. If you have 115 different data sets, if you don't have a common data standard, you're not going anywhere. Thank you.
Secretary.
So there was just one thing that I wanted to say is that, you've graciously listened to me sort of talk about lean in MOJ and building information modelling. But if I'd have had this conversation with you 2 years ago, we wouldn't have any of that. We didn't have a standardised library. So it's only that, we took a decision, and I was really lucky to put together a really good team that when they started to understand what they could achieve, and more importantly, what the MOJ was allowing them to achieve, and being able to work with our supply chain, we suddenly started to get standardised courts and standardised prisons and standardised libraries. So I'd hate you to think that we've had this sort of massive sort of legacy of sort of using data efficiently and effectively. Actually, most of this is done over the past 2 years. So I think no matter where anyone's starting from, I think you'll get up to the stage that we're getting to very, very quickly, quicker than we did, because we can share the learning with everybody. So I think it really is a prize worth getting, because I think people can get to where we've got with a bit of sort of collaboration and a bit of will, probably within 12 months-ish.
I think that's a very encouraging point to draw today's discussions to a close. I listened to Terry a couple of years ago, 2 years ago in 2012 at the IC conference, and one of the points I did pick up was he was very appreciative of the goodwill that was surrounding him as he started into his pilot project. So I'm looking forward to enjoying the same goodwill as we roll off with our PPP stimulus package and our BIM requirements in there. So hopefully our industry and collaborators will respond in kind. I think our conversation this morning, we've covered a great deal. We have had some very fine presentations and some rich discussions to follow in our Q&A session. I would like, perhaps if we could, to show our appreciation to the speakers this morning. So I think not much left, but get going on BIM delivery and encourage our policymakers to align on policy positions and go for it. I think there's great benefits to be had. But as you can see, there's hard work and graft in getting there. Just finally, our next session is going to be BIM for Health, and it's on the 30th of April, and our chair for that session will be Tom Costello. So I hope you can turn out again, and hopefully we can have an equally rich conversation and on the BIM agenda. Thank you very much.